Jake with Bond Performance. I'm going to talk today about why it's difficult for some people and why it takes such a, let's say, better planned exhaust system to get the sound that you want and keep these cars sounding good. Now, I understand good is a subjective thing, and to some people, 4 cylinders never sound good. Some people love them, some people hate them, some people dislike them. We're not going to get into that. Everybody is fine to have their own opinion. I'm going to talk about what specifically applies to the Mk7 in comparison to what we're used to as far as 4 cylinders. The previous generation 2.0 TSI and 2.0 TFSI, the 1.8Ts, Hondas, Subarus. So this will apply just to the Mk7 specifically. So the turbocharger and the cylinder head design have a huge factor in how these cars sound. The turbo on this car for the first time in a GTI Golf or R uses an electronic diverter valve and electronic wastegate in conjunction with each other. They do this to allow a tighter hot side housing, resulting in quicker spool. So to counteract that, to keep from hurting the car or having drivability issues, the ECU considers load and RPM and throttle input and tons of factors to determine when it's appropriate to open either or, and in some instances both, the diverter valve dumping cold side boost and the electronic wastegate dumping hot side drive pressure, which is the opposite of boost, what drives the boost, to slow down the spool of the turbo in situations where it's not necessarily called for, but just the nature of the drive dynamics would cause that to happen, like climbing a hill at a low RPM. There's really no need for the turbo to be spooled if you're not asking for more throttle input. So in some instances, especially with some of the older revision tunes, say third gear at maybe 35 miles per hour, if you get on the throttle a little harder than you should, you may hear just a whooshing sound where the diverter valve is open and it's bleeding off boost pressure because the car doesn't really require it to maintain the speed you're going, and it's doing that to keep the engine happy and keep drivability as smooth as possible. So doing all these things affects the sound, because obviously when you're bleeding off drive pressure or the external wastegate, you're bypassing the turbine wheel of the turbo altogether, resulting in what most would relate to a Honda or diesel sound. Non-turbo, super deep and bassy, undesirable to most tone. And that low RPM kind of just fart sound that these cars can make, not referring to DSG farts, but just like that, is a result of, on the lower end of things, the turbine wheel being bypassed by the electronic wastegate, where previously cars never had that technology or the ability to do that. The wastegate was always opened by boost pressure through a vacuum actuator, where spring pressure and air pressure would work together at higher RPMs and higher boost to be able to open or close the wastegate. So with the technology in the Mk7, that can be done at any RPM. Or if, say, you have an EPC light and the car's protecting itself, it can make no boost no matter what to protect itself. So back on track to sound, the third aspect of the turbo and cylinder head design that makes a big difference is what we refer to as a headifold. There's no exhaust manifold on these cars. The turbo actually bolts directly to the cylinder head. So to be able to accommodate that in such a compact package, the exhaust runners are wildly different lengths. Cylinders 1 and 4 obviously being much longer than 2 and 3, which are a very short and basically straight run to the inlet of the turbo or the outlet of the headifold. Most famously, the EJ Subaru engines have a vastly unequal length header, which gives them a very distinct rumble tone to their exhaust note. So with these being such short runners and the electronic wastegate and diverter valve coming into play, it's not as distinct or as deep of a rumble as an EJ, but the quote-unquote bad exhaust sounds are amplified by unequal length, where in the past something like a built Evo or Honda or even a earlier gen GTI having a equal length or much closer to equal length header manifold would make what most of us would consider to be a much more desirable sound. So with those three obstacles to overcome with the Mark 7, a lot of people end up not happy with their exhaust choice. So a lot of people that haven't followed GTI Jake with me on the forums from the beginning don't know that a lot of this, I was starting out green to technology, as most of you and most other manufacturers are, and just kind of had to learn by trial and error. Like a lot of guys starting out, when I first bought the car, I just wanted some extra volume and did a muffler delete, which wasn't bad, a little on the unrefined side, but the problem with the muffler delete comes with the progression of mods. Myself, like most people, I wanted a downpipe, and I actually just kind of stumbled into a free downpipe early on. I've covered that in other videos, I believe. But anyway, a downpipe plus a muffler delete equals the absolute worst exhaust note possible. Terrible, awful drone that'll drive you insane. It's super embarrassing exhaust note that'll make you want to wear a paper bag over your head to conceal your identity. I mean, it's bad. I almost didn't want to drive the car for the week that I waited on parts. So, just as a point of reference, it's not an exact science, but basically, anytime you add a downpipe, you're going to double the volume that you've already gained. So, if the car is completely stock otherwise and you add a downpipe, you're only going to double your stock volume. So where it was completely silent, now it's just above silent and has a little bit of a vacuum cleaner sound to it. It's not a good or desirable or in any way a sporty sound, outside of if maybe you've got a crackle and pop tune, or you're revving in on cold start high idle, which kind of fakes a better exhaust sound. A downpipe with the factory exhaust just doesn't really have much to it at all in the way of things to be desired. So moving on from there, if you're the kind of guy that does a CSS muffler or a catback first, what sounds good without a resonator or with the stock resonator in place will quickly become overkill because you're doubling that volume. So if you've added XYZ catback and you jump into a downpipe, you have to remember that you're going to double your overall volume output. And with volume also comes, to some measure, drone. So again, back to subjective. Some people find that drone is intrusive at this decibel, and some find it's their tolerance is much higher. But just as a general rule of thumb, you're gonna double volume, and drone will increase considerably when you add a downpipe to an already louder setup. So I realize that not everyone's budget is unlimited, and some people want instant results and don't want to save up for an exhaust, and that's fine, because I was there in that same boat before too, so not holding that against anyone. And there's also some guys that don't want to add a ton of overall volume at all. There's a lot of Mark 7 owners that are more mature and work in a professional environment where maybe they need to be able to haul their boss around or customers, or they're on the phone a lot, where something loud wouldn't work for them, which is where the OEM fitment resonated mid-pipe that I offer comes into play. With my downpipe, or with basically any aftermarket downpipe, it continues on 3-inch. A single cut is made to the factory catback, and it bolts on similar to a muffler delete, just using the supplied clamp. Fully reversible. If you ever go back to stock, you just reuse the same clamp. It's a good fit for some people, but when you add a resonator, you're also going to lose some volume along with some of that drone. Volume and drone will always coexist with each other, and there's no way around that. So it's kind of the having your cake and eating it too kind of scenario. So just trying to paint the picture as best I can to help you guys get the volume, the tone, and a tolerable drone level on the first try, or if you're doing it in stages, in 2 tries. Step 1 being maybe a downpipe and a mid-pipe, or just a downpipe, and the second step doing a catback, or the inverse of that being if you start with a catback and then eventually want to add a downpipe later. So in my opinion, for any Mk7 to sound good, it needs to have a cat, a resonator, and a muffler. The resonator I've found that works with everything, absolutely everything, is a Vibrant 17950. Now, quarter wavelength tubes can be utilized, but I haven't personally experimented with them because I've never had the need, because the Vibrant 18-inch overall length, 5-inch outer case diameter 17950 does the job. It's relatively cheap. It's a compact enough size that you can fit it where you need to, and it just works. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, but the tried and true and proven way is with the Vibrant 17950 exhaust, and I use that in every turbo back or catback intended to be used with a downpipe that I build. So the cat thing is also subjective. I personally do not build catless. I don't feel there's anything to be gained if you're talking a percentage of a horsepower versus the adverse smell and problems that can cause with just the general public being around your car, significant others that might not be car enthusiasts riding in the car, your boss again. There's way too many benefits to having a cat to even consider catless. So I'm not going to sit here and hound the guys that are catless. I just personally do not endorse catless, and I don't build them. So moving on, the cat helps with the refined sound a little bit. I know some guys are just dead set on throwing flames out the exhaust, and they might have a better chance of doing that without a cat. More power to you if that's your thing. But most of us aren't really looking for that. So these days I'm using a GESI 300 cell cat. There's 2 different versions of it. Both are made in Canada. Both are 304L stainless. Good stuff. Again, if there is any measurable restriction, it's super minimal, so no problems there. Guys claiming that their car is a race car, highly unlikely. Basically everybody drives a Mk7 to drive it on the street. So cat, resonator, now we've got to the muffler. If you've got a big old honking muffler on there, like AWE Track, or Touring for that matter, uses, or some of the other brands are using excessively large mufflers, when you add a proper resonator, you're not really going to have the sound volume that a lot of guys are looking for. It works for some, it doesn't work for all. So just something to keep in mind. That's why I offer 3 different versions of my catback. The less aggressive, featuring a Borla XS Pro muffler. Not the same Borla muffler that Borla uses. My system has 0 similarities with Borla. They use a different resonator and a completely different manufacturing process. So absolutely nothing in common other than I source one of my muffler options from them. The next step up the spectrum would be the aggressive catback exhaust. I don't share that muffler, but it's a smaller muffler. It's what's on my personal car. It's a slight trade-off, and you know, there can be some drone. It can be just a little bit on the loud side in normal driving. You guys can hear it in the background here. Just kind of granny driving around, just kind of watching the road, holding the camera, multitasking here. But it's not for everybody. I like it. It's the compromise for what I'd consider the ultimate exhaust for these cars, my valved turbo back exhaust, which utilizes the same muffler as less aggressive and a bypass valve from QuickTime Performance in California that can be controlled with a switch or a remote control, and that gives the best of both worlds. Stealth GTI's got a great video hitting all the highs, lows, pros, cons, and his opinions on the less aggressive. If you want to check that out, he's scheduled to drop it this week, so keep an eye out for that. He does a lot better job with his YouTube videos than I do, so it's a great look into the quality of my products and unbiased opinion on it. It's not all praise. I've seen the sneak preview of the full length of the clips. He will give a 100% honest review on that, so be sure to check it out. So it's giving that more conservative, it's the most mature full exhaust option I have, or with the click of a button or a flip of the switch, you can go full rowdy race car mode and bypass the muffler altogether. But having compared the sound of just a 17950 resonator by itself in the valve system, where it's lying off in a U-bend, there is still a little bit of sound traveling through the muffler with the valve open, even though at high RPMs, you know, velocity and flow will be taking, you know, 90% or more of the flow out the valve. Some is still going through the muffler, especially at lower RPM, slower velocity, and it just sounds phenomenal. I'll have more videos coming from California on that. The owner of the car is having his car dyno tuned with that exhaust today at EQT, so hopefully everything goes well with that. He's going to be 91 octane tuned with standard EQT Vortex turbo, my full turbo back exhaust, and intercooler. So he should be right around 400 horsepower, and he's got the valve system so he can tone things down a bit or go full rowdy and super not California compliant and really be loud. So looking forward to hearing that. And that brings us to one last talking point about variables in a Mark 7 setup. The larger turbo you have, the more noise you're going to have, the more volume, and the lower RPM the drone will start at, and the higher RPM the drone will continue on to. Because like I said before, the more exhaust gases that are bypassing the turbine wheel, the more naturally aspirated, kind of haunted diesel tones you're going to get. So in moving up from a standard IS-20 turbo to a larger hybrid or full frame turbo, it's going to spool slower, it's going to have that naturally aspirated sound longer, and you're going to run into overall rowdier setup regardless of what it is. So what may have sounded just right IS-20, if you plan to move up to a hybrid, that may be the difference in maybe future-proofing your build by getting the less aggressive version of my exhaust versus the aggressive, because where the less aggressive may be a little bit quieter than you want IS-20, stepping up to a bigger turbo will probably put you exactly where you want to be. Whereas the opposite, if you start out right where you want to be and you know you're going to go to a bigger turbo, the aggressive system can end up being overwhelming with a bigger turbo. So again, anybody who stuck with me for the full 20 minutes, I appreciate it. I know it's kind of long-winded, trying to put a lot of information out there. Did this all in one take, so sorry it's not very cinematic or exciting. But for those of you that want to do it right and get it the way you want it on your first try, this is all good stuff. I wish somebody had this out there when I was starting out. It would have saved me a lot of time and money, but then again, we probably wouldn't have Bond Performance as a result. So it is what it is. It's a blessing in disguise, I guess. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Comment below. Let me know what you guys want to hear in upcoming videos. I try to touch on things that I get a lot of questions about. It's not necessarily in spite of having to explain things a lot. It helps me save a lot of time to be able to just link somebody to a video to help them understand something, rather than me texting all this out. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.